Alright guys, this lesson's a little bit different. We're dealing with the properties of math. See this, to identify the properties of addition and multiplication. That simply means there's a few rules that we have when we're adding or we're multiplying that just help you understand how numbers work and make it easier if you just know the rules. So there's just a few that we're going to go over. There's not a lot of problems. It's more being able to identify the properties, which means you need to write the terms down and make sure that you know the terms. So the first one we're going to look at is called the commutative property. The commutative property simply states that the order doesn't matter in both addition and multiplication. What that means is the order in which I add something doesn't matter. So what we normally do is we give you what we call a formula, meaning we show you with letters, because it doesn't matter what numbers you use. You can plug anything in for these and it would be true. And then I've showed you with numbers as well. So basically what I'm saying is it doesn't matter if I add A to B or B to A to get the same answer. So then I showed that to you with numbers as well. 6 plus negative 2. If you go back and you remember our rules for adding integers, I have opposite signs, which means I'm going to wind up subtracting the absolute values. 6 minus 2 is 4. The sign of the larger absolute value, which is 6, is the sign of your answer, so it would be 4. If I look, I have negative 2 plus 6. That should also give me 4, so we'll give it a try. Again, we're adding integers with unlike signs, so I'm going to subtract. 6 minus 2 is 4. 6 is my larger digit. Its sign is positive. So it doesn't matter what order I did it in, I still wind up with the same answer. Same thing over here with multiplying. Doesn't matter what order I do it in, I get the same answer. 6 times 2 is 12. There's an odd number of negative signs, so it's negative. Negative 2 times 6, well 2 times 6 is 12. There's an odd number of negative signs, so my answer is also negative. Just saying, doesn't matter what order it's in. The next one we want to look at also applies to both addition and multiplication. This one is called the associative property. And what it's saying is it doesn't matter how you group things. If I'm adding more than 2 numbers, or if I'm multiplying more than 2 numbers, I generally do 2 numbers and then I multiply or I add that third one. Doesn't matter which way I do it. I can do it any way I like. That's all it's saying. So if you look here, I have 3 different things I'm adding. Again, we've written the formula, A plus B plus C. This means I can add B and C first, and then add A in, or I could add A and B, and then add in C. I'll still get the same answer. So if you look here, first I'm adding my 2 plus my 3, which is 5. 5 plus negative 6 is negative 1. What I'm saying is if I do this addition, I'm still going to wind up with the same answer. So here I have negative 6 plus 2, which gives me a negative 4. Negative 4 plus 3 also gives me a negative 1. So it doesn't matter which way I group them, I still wind up with the same answer. Again, the same is true over here with multiplication. Doesn't matter what order I multiply them in, I'm still going to wind up with the same answer. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 6 is 36. There's one negative, which means it's a negative 36. Over here, I have negative 6 times 2. There's one negative, so that makes it negative 12. 12 times 13 is 36. There's one negative, so it's a negative 36. So the order in which I'm doing it makes no difference to the problem. I'm still going to wind up with the same answer. All right, our next one is the identity property, which also works for addition and multiplication. I've written them separately because it's a different number that we use. So if you look at this and you think identity, it means it's not changing the number. Its identity stays the same. So for adding, that would be adding 0. If I give you nothing, you still have the same thing. So that's what I'm saying. It's not changing the identity of the number's not changing. So as a formula, A plus 0 would still give me A. With numbers, 2 plus 0 is 2. That's all I'm saying. I add 0, I don't change the identity. There's also identity of multiplication. We're just using a different number. In multiplication, it's the number 1 that doesn't make a difference. Anything times 1 is itself. So here I've shown you again in the formula, A times 1 is still going to give me A. Whatever number I plug in there is going to stay the same. 3 times 1 still gives me 3. Our next one is the inverse property. Sorry, some of that faded a little bit. The inverse property. We defined additive inverse back in an earlier video, so you should be familiar with that. The inverse property simply tells me that the sum of any number plus its additive inverse, or its opposite, is going to give me 0. So basically, if I have a and I give you negative a, that means I'm going to wind up with 0. If we look at this in a problem form, a negative 5 and a positive 5 are going to cancel each other out. They're going to leave me with 0. These are also sometimes called a 0 pair because it's the additive inverse and of the number. All right, the 0 property. This is only one that works with multiplication, just like the other one was only addition. This is strictly a multiplication one. The 0 property tells me that anything times 0 gives me 0. These are rules that you've probably known, you just didn't know there was a name to them. And now we're putting a name to them, and I want you to learn it. These are good things to know, though, because you don't have to think about a problem when you're multiplying by 0. Anything times 0 is 0. So b times 0 gives me 0. Here I gave us a big number. Why? Because it doesn't matter. 7,520 times 0 still gives me 0. All right, the next one we have, and this comes in very handy when we get into solving equations. So this is a good one for you to learn and to understand how it works. This one is called the distributive property. If you're distributing something, it means you're passing it out to different people. So basically, our distributive property tells us that I can multiply the sum or the difference of something in parentheses, which would be the same as multiplying each of those factors by that same number. It's a bit of a mouthful, and sometimes the wording can be confusing. I like to show it more with the examples here. So if you look here, here I have an addition problem. So if we're following order of operations, what it's telling me is I should add the two numbers in the parentheses together first, then multiply it by the number outside the parentheses. Well, what we're doing when we use the distributive property is we're kind of going around the order of operations. And this would come in handy, for example, here. I don't know what these numbers are, so I can't actually multiply them yet. So what I do is I take this number that is outside and I distribute it to both of these. So what I'm saying is I can take this multiplication and I can do it first, but I have to multiply both of my other numbers by the number on the outside. So I'm taking the a, I'm multiplying it times my first factor, which is b. I'm taking the a, I'm multiplying it by times the second factor, which is c. So AB plus AC is going to give me the same thing as if I did this addition and then multiplied it. So I'm going to show you how that works with numbers just so that you can see you do wind up with the same answer. So this one will follow the proper order of operations, which says I need to do my addition first. 3 plus 4 is 7. 7 times 2 is 14. So now here on this side what I've done is I've distributed. I've taken this 2 and I'm going to multiply it by both of my factors, then I'm going to add them together. 2 times 3 gives me 6. 2 times 4 gives me 8. And if I add 6 plus 8, I wind up with 14. So it's just a kind of way to go out of order. And like I said, this is something that comes in handy once you start solving equations. If there's an unknown number in this parenthesis, that's where you would have to use it and have to kind of go outside of your order of operations. The same thing happens if I'm subtracting on the inside. Just make sure that your subtraction or your addition stays the same. It still works the exact same way. So again, here, we'll do it the right way. 4 minus 3 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. Here, what I've done on the other side is I've taken the 2 and I've distributed it. So I'm going to multiply it by both of my factors. 2 times 4 is 8. That's a subtraction problem. 2 times 3 is 6. 8 minus 6 also gives me 2. So you'll see it works either way. That's the last property we're going to look at. Now we're just going to look at a couple of examples. Basically, we want to identify the property that was being used. So I just gave you a whole bunch of terms. So we want to figure out which property is being shown here. So if you look here, what we're doing is we're multiplying. So what property told us that anything times 0 is 0? That was the 0 property. Over here, I'm adding, so it's going to be a property of addition, negative 8 plus 0. So what I've done is I've still wound up with negative 8, so my number that did not lose its identity, I added 0, that's the identity property. The identity property simply says that the number's not changing. I added 0, my number didn't change, identity property. Over here, -5 times 1, I still wind up with -5. That, again, is the identity property. However, now we're using multiplication. So there's an addition identity property, there's a multiplication identity property. So this is the identity property of multiplication. Over here, what you'll notice is I'm adding 3 numbers, and on the other side I'm still adding them. I've just moved the parentheses. So here I'm saying add these ones first. Over here I'm saying add these ones first. That was our associative property. And what I find is a lot of times kids get confused between associative and commutative because they're very similar properties. Associative is if you have more than 2 numbers. Commutative is if you only have 2 numbers. So that's our associative property. It's telling me it doesn't matter which way I group them, which ones I add first, they're still going to be the same answer. All right, if you come down here to this one, what you'll notice is I have a number that I'm multiplying by the difference of a number. Over here, I've taken the 8 times 9. I'm going to subtract the 8 times 6. Sorry, -8. So what you'll notice is what I've done on the other side is I've taken this 8 and I've distributed it. So this is the distributive property. And it's over subtraction. It can be over subtraction or addition. It doesn't make a difference. All right, the next thing I want to look at, this is just identifying what property we talked about. Down here, these ones, I want to talk about how are we going to find a missing value. Well, we need to know our properties in order for this to work. So if we look here, first let's figure out what property we're using. I have a multiplication problem. I'm multiplying 7 times the sum of -2 and 4. Over here, I've got 7 times -2 and a times 4. So if you look, this is the distributive property. This is not what I want us to write, but I'm just helping you figure this out. Distributive. So the distributive property tells me I'm taking the 7 and multiplying it by both factors. So this missing number would be my -7 that was on the outside. The distributive property tells me I can take this number, I can multiply it by the first factor, which I've done here, and I can take this number, I can multiply it by the second factor, which is right over here. So this A should just be a -7. So once you know what property is, it makes it a little easier to figure out what number needs to go in there. So here again, you'll look, again, I notice that this is the distributive property. This time it's over subtraction. And what you'll notice is I'm not asking you to solve the problem. I just want to figure out what my missing value is. So 3 times the difference of 2 and -2 and 5 is the same as 3 times 2 minus 3 times, well, what's my missing number? My factor of 5. So my missing number is simply 5. When you come into class, we'll make some posters to help you remember those and get some visuals in there to help us remember which property is which.